nothing in the world or out of it can possibly be conceived that could be called good without qualification except a good will. Immanuel Kant.
A central question for any sort of moral philosophy is, of course, what makes a moral person? How to tell whether someone is good or evil? And this seems something that is answered easily enough. Many people would probably say a person is good if the person does good deeds. Of course, that opens a whole can of worms of its own, because the question would now be what are good deeds, and there might be disagreement on that. But that I want to put aside here in this lecture because I already talked about that in previous lectures. I refer back to my 3 lectures on the categorical imperative, on the moral law, on human dignity, on the kingdom of purposes, because with that Kant answers the question, what do we ought to do? What is our moral duty? But in fact, Kant would say that it is too easy and too superficial to just go by a person's actions. Good actions don't make a good person because you can do them for the right or for the wrong reasons. And that is precisely the question that matters. What are the reasons for doing those actions? Let me illustrate that with an example. Let's say there's someone drowning in a lake, and at the shore there's a bunch of people who witness that, who see it, and now they react differently. Let's say person A and person B jump into the water, try to swim over and to pull that drowning person out. And let's say that person C and person D don't. They stay at the shore. Now, who is a good person in this scenario? The only correct answer, and this is not a matter of opinion, the only correct answer is we don't know. With the information I just gave you, with that limited information, you cannot possibly know who is good, who is evil here. You can say that, of course, the drowning person should be saved. So A and B outwardly did a good action, did what they were morally obliged to do. But you don't know why they did it. Now, let's say that person A really has a good will, really has reverence for the moral law and really acted out of moral duty, because he has reverence for humanity and wanted to save the humanity of the drowning person. Then, yes, A would be a good person. But now let's say person B, who did the exact same action as person A, let's say that person B is completely selfish and doesn't care about humanity, doesn't really care whether that drowning person dies or lives. Let's say that he saved him for some selfish reason. Maybe he's just afraid of the consequences of not doing it. Like, I don't know about the laws in your country, but here in Germany at least we have a law that if you see someone in an accident or whatever, you have to help him. If you don't help and then the person comes to harm or even dies and you could have saved them, you can actually go to jail for that. So maybe he's just afraid of being punished for not helping. Or maybe he wants to play the hero. Maybe there's a girl he wants to impress who is also at the shore and he just wants to look like a great hero by saving that person. Or maybe let's say the person drowning happens to be rich and he knows that it's a billionaire who's drowning and he's hoping that if he saves him then the grateful guy will reward him with some millions or whatever. In that case, the action is still the same, right? The action is the action that is that the moral law tells us to do, but he doesn't do it because the moral law tells him to do it. He does it for selfish reasons. And now let's consider person C. Let's say that person C is just as selfish as person B, doesn't care about humanity either, doesn't care about the moral law either, but his selfishness sees no good reason, nothing that compels him to jump into the water and save that person. Like, maybe he's not afraid of going to jail over it, or maybe there's no one at the shore that he wants to impress, or maybe he already is rich and doesn't need the reward, or maybe he isn't rich but he just doesn't know that the person in the water happens to be rich. Like, maybe if person B didn't know it's a rich guy who might reward him, he would also not jump in. And maybe person C would jump in if he, like B, had this information that the drowning person is rich. In that case, while B is acting better outwardly than C is, you really have no reason to say that B is even slightly a better person than C. They are both equally evil. They are both selfish. It just so happens that for B, his selfish goals align with what is his moral duty, align with the interest of the drowning person, and for C, they happen to not align. But that is not a moral quality. That is just a coincidence that could also be otherwise. And finally, let's say that person D does not jump into the water to help, but let's say that he very much wants to. Let's say that he indeed has reverence for humanity and wants to save that person. It just so happens that he can't swim. So he just can't pull him out. Jumping into the water would not help the drowning person. It would just lead to two people drowning, which is really not better than one person drowning. That would also mean that while person A is acting better than person D, jumping into the water, saving the drowning person, as opposed to staying at the shore, inwardly, if you don't judge by their actions but by their will, they are equally good people. Because again, being able to swim or not is not a moral quality. It's not a moral failing to not be able to swim. So, in that sense, they are equally good because they both equally want what is good. They have a good will. They just don't have the equal ability to realize their goodwill in this situation, to actually act on their goodwill, but they have the same goodwill. And so it is entirely possible, if you, let's say, compare person B and person D now, it's entirely possible that someone does a good action, jumping into the water, saving the drowning person, and another one doesn't do a good action, stays at the shore, and still that second person is a better human being. Because he truly wants what is good, he just didn't have the chance to do it in this case, while the other one happened to do something good, but just because it happened to benefit him, not because he really wanted to do something good. And that is precisely why Kant says that of all things in the world, the only thing that is truly good, without any exception, is the goodwill. it is the only thing that really matters. To Kant, there are not really good actions as such. There are actions that a good will lead to, sure, but as such, as actions, they are neither good nor bad. Only the will is good. And here it is important to know that to Kant, the human faculty of desiring, I discussed it more in its own lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and will. The human faculty of desiring has precisely these two parts. There is the faculty of choice and there is the will. Choice, or Willkür, as Kant calls it in German, which could also be translated as arbitrariness, but it's not meant in the sense of arbitrarily doing whatever, just randomly picking something. So choice in that sense is a better translation, because it is our faculty of being able to choose between various actions, choose between A and B. So our actions, like jumping into the water or staying at the shore, they are determined by our choice. But choice as such is not moral or immoral. The point is that our choice is always determined by what Kant calls a driving spring. Again, I discussed that further in that other lecture that you might check out. Something needs to drive our choice. We can pick between A and B, but we don't pick randomly. There is something that makes us pick A, or that makes us pick B. And this driving spring can be essential, a pathological drive, like it is in animals. But it can also be a motive of our will. Our will is sort of the higher faculty of desiring to Kant, and the will doesn't pick a specific action. Like the will doesn't choose, I want to jump into the water to save that person. The will rather decides on the general mode, the general form of our action. Like the will says, I want to be good, or I want to be selfish. And that general will of ours will then determine our choice, which situation by situation will pick what is the good thing to do here, or what is the selfish thing that benefits me most to do here in this situation. And the point to Kant, once again, is that morality is not about our choice, about which action we pick to do, but rather it is about our will. That is why Kant, when it comes to actions, distinguishes between what he calls the legality and the morality of an action. Now, the action is legal if it conforms with the moral law. It's important here that when Kant uses the word legal here in his moral philosophy, he doesn't mean legal in the sense we usually use the word that is in a juristical sense, like not legal as in conforming with the arbitrary laws of the state, but rather legal as in conforming with the moral law, which is not always the same thing, right? So if I live in the Nazi state and I save some Jew, I help him to flee, that might be an illegal action as according to the current regime. But in a moral sense, it is of course a legal action. It is an action that very much conforms with the moral law. So by legality, we are not talking about actual specific laws given by some government. We are talking about the moral law here. But still, there's a difference between legality and morality to Kant. An action is legal when it is in accordance with the moral law. But that doesn't say anything about our will. That only says that our choice picked the right action. But it doesn't say why our choice picked it. If it was driven to do so by a good will, or by some sensual drive or instinct or desire that just so happened to, in this specific case, align with our moral duty. Morality, an action only has if it is done not only in accordance with the law, but because the law says that we should do it. That is what the good will is about. I have a good will if I act in a good manner because this is a good manner, not because for some other reason, not because I benefit from it, not because I think that this way I will avoid jail, or this way I will go to heaven and be rewarded, or this way I will make lots of money or impress people or be well liked, not even out of compassion, which I explained in an earlier lecture. Even if I act just because I feel pity for someone, it's still selfish. I'm not really doing it because it's my moral duty. I'm doing it because I feel bad when someone else suffers. So in the end, I'm doing it for myself, to myself feel better. Just so happens that I feel better when somebody else also feels better. The goodwill that is determining the morality of an action as opposed to its mere legality. The goodwill is the will that wants to do good as such, that wants to do something simply because it is the right thing to do and not for any other reasons. What alone matters to Kant when it comes to morality is what in German he calls Gesinnung, which is a word that can't be translated perfectly. I looked up at suggested translations, and it suggests translating it with attitude, which is not fully wrong, but an attitude feels to be something way more superficial than a Gesinnung is. Gesinnung is much deeper in your heart. There's also the translation as mindset, but Gesinnung is not just about the mind. Again, that sounds too superficial. Maybe we could better translate it as heart set rather than mindset. Maybe it's best to go with a Greek word and to say it's more like an ethos. It's the inner posture, the inner way of feeling and being and wanting that you have. And this is what truly makes a person moral or not moral. This should be quite obvious if you think about it. I mean, to say that morality is about our outer actions may sound right in the first second, but if you really think it through, it's quite absurd. Like, if that was true, I could take the best, the most holy person who ever lived, the greatest saint, and I could make him completely immoral simply by capturing him, locking him away, putting him in chains, because that would obviously prevent him from doing any more good deeds. But it is quite clear that this is just a physical but not a moral restraint. I can restrain someone's body and thereby his ability to act, but I cannot restrain someone's will. He can only stop wanting to do good by his own, but not because I force him to stop wanting it. So, why I could take a person who does good deeds and make him stop doing good deeds, prevent him from realizing his will, he would still have an equally good will as before and still be an equally good person, judging by his inner ethos. Or likewise, imagine someone is always donating money to good causes because he's genuinely a good person. Again, the action as such you don't know. Someone could also be donating money for tax benefits or whatever. But let's say he really does it out of being a good person. But now let's say he loses his money, like without any fault of his own. Maybe he loses his job and now he has less money. He barely gets by, so he cuts down on his donations. That doesn't mean that he became a worse person than he was before. He is still an equally good person. He just lost the ability to act on his goodwill. At least to act on his goodwill in this specific way by donating money. Maybe he will still be doing other good things that cost less or whatever. So clearly, you have to judge an action by the will out of which it was done. You could give endless examples for this. I mean, recently there was this case in the United States where someone attacked two Israeli Jews who had been there visiting, which, by the way, that alone is enough to show that they must be evil people, because what business do they have taking a plane in the middle of a climate emergency and flying to America? But that aside, they were being shot at. Someone was trying to kill them. Thankfully, the shooter missed. He was shooting at them while they were in a car, and he didn't manage to mortally wound them. And by the way, when they immediately after the shooting posted about this online, they suspected that this was the guy who had shot at them, that he was some Arab, that this was an anti-Semitic attack, and they ended their post with "Death to all Arabs." That's the average Israeli for you. But that aside, it turned out, of course, after they had written that post, before the post just sounded evil and genocidal, now it also sounds kind of embarrassing, because it turned out that the guy who had shot them and tried to kill them was actually Jewish himself. And he had attacked them not for being Jews, but rather because to him they had looked Arab and he wanted to kill two Arabs. And just happened to confuse Jews for Arabs. Now, if you take this story, it should be clear that this attack was not done out of hate for Jews. So you cannot call it a hate crime against Jews. You must call it a hate crime against Arabs, even though no Arabs were involved or harmed. Because while the action was shooting at Jews, the will was to shoot Arabs. So, again, it's not an anti-Jewish hate crime. You might still call it an anti-Semitic hate crime, because people like to forget, but Arabs too are Semites and Islam is a Semitic religion. But it is certainly not an anti-Jewish hate crime, it's an anti-Arabic hate crime, despite the guy not shooting at Arabs. Because clearly the guy was just stupid. Stupidity to Kant is a lack of the power of judgment. Because to Kant, the intellect is our faculty of rules, of concepts. The intellect contains concepts like dog or house or car or Jew or Arab, and those concepts are rules. Like, when I think these things, then I think certain attributes. When I think dog, I think furry, four-legged, friendly animal that is kept as a pet. When I think car, then I think four-wheeled vehicle that people use to drive around and ruin the climate with. I have certain rules in my head, and this is what the intellect is about. I talked about this more in its own lecture on what is the intellect. And many people would say that if you don't have many concepts, like if you don't know what something is, then you are dumb. But that's actually wrong and unjust. Kant would say that how many concepts we have in our intellect doesn't say anything about whether we are dumb or smart. The intellect can always be taught, and a very dumb person could know a lot, could have many concepts, but we can just not use his knowledge properly. No, being dumb or being smart, being prudent is more about your power of judgment. That faculty too I explained in its own lecture. And the power of judgment is what lets us apply our concepts. Like when I have an animal in front of me that I see, I have the concept of dog, I have the concept of cat, I have the concept of horse, the concept of bird in my intellect, and now I have to make the judgment. This here in front of me is a dog and not a bird. And if I lack power of judgment, if I cannot apply my concepts correctly, that is stupid. So this guy, clearly he has some concept of what a Jew is, what an Arab is, and clearly he misjudged. He probably thought, oh, those guys are a little dark-skinned, because, yeah, half of the Israelis are Arab Jews, even if they themselves might have forgotten that. And he might have thought, oh, dark-skinned equals Arab. Can't be Arabic Jew, can't be, I don't know, someone else, a Latino or whatever. No, must be Arabs. I'm gonna shoot at them. So, okay, the guy was not just evil and hateful and racist, he was also dumb. But stupidity, that's the point here, stupidity is not a moral quality. So his stupidity does not make him hate Arabs any less. So just because he was too stupid to shoot at actual Arabs doesn't mean that it was no longer an anti-Arab hate crime. So therefore, it should be obvious that you need to judge not by someone's actions, like whom is he shooting at, but rather you need to judge by someone's will. And sometimes it could be that a good will does not lead to a good outcome. And like maybe I want to heal someone who is terminally ill, and I give what I think is a medicine, but without my knowledge someone has replaced the medicine with a poison, and now I'm killing that person. But still, that does not make me an evil person, because I didn't want to kill him. I actually wanted to save him. My will was good. And this is what we should always judge by, because otherwise someone could be doing good actions, but without a good will. Like someone could heal a person, give him the right medicine or the right surgery or whatever, but not out of reverence for his humanity, but rather just because it's a job or because he wants to be a hero or whatever. Like someone could even, I don't know, find a cure for cancer and still be an evil person, because maybe he didn't seek it because he genuinely wanted to help people, but just because he wanted to make lots of money, or because he wanted to get famous and win a Nobel Prize or whatever. Selfishness might in certain situations benefit not just me but also others, maybe benefit them a lot, but it still remains selfishness, it still remains immoral. To Kant, the difference here, and this is an important difference in philosophy, not just when it comes to morality, the difference is between the letter and the spirit. Like when you have a text, the letter of a text is what it actually says. The spirit is what is meant by it. Right? Two people could be saying the very same thing when it comes to the letter, but with a very different spirit. Like when you ask somebody, "How are you?" and the person answers, "Oh, I'm good." Two people could give that same answer, say, "I'm good," same letter, but maybe in the one case, the person actually means, "Yeah, I'm good, I'm having a great day." And maybe in the other case, the person means, "Actually, I'm not good, but I don't want to talk about it. I want to just get this over with, and I don't want you to ask more." If I answered "I'm bad," then you would ask why and so on, and I don't want that. So the letter is not the same as the spirit. Very important in philosophy. And this also goes for actions. To Kant, an action can have a letter, that is the actual action being done, and it can have a spirit, that is, again, what he calls Gesinnung, so the ethos out of which the action is being done. And here, once again, you can see, I already said that in previous lectures, that Kant doesn't just have a moral philosophy or a better moral philosophy than others, but rather he has the moral philosophy, the only one. And everyone who disagrees with Kant has no moral philosophy at all. I explained in the lecture on the imperatives already that Kant shows there can only really be two principles of action. So there can only be really two basic types of practical philosophy, and that is the doctrine of wisdom or of morality. And on the other hand, it's the doctrine of prudence or of happiness. And now the thing is, Kant says the distinction between the letter and the spirit only happens in matters of reason. So, whatever comes out of reason, that has a spirit. So to say, an insight that cannot be seen but only thought. But whatever is not from reason, whatever belongs only to the sensual world, that has only a letter and no spirit. And well, if you consider the doctrine of wisdom or of morality as opposed to the doctrine of prudence or of happiness, you can realize that the latter doesn't know or doesn't care about the spirit. Kant says when it comes to happiness, the intention of an action doesn't matter, only the result does, right? So let's go back to the example from the start. Someone is drowning. If one person jumps in, saves him, another person doesn't jump in, doesn't save him, their morality, that's another question. Maybe the one jumping in does so for selfish reasons, thinking he will get a reward. Maybe the one not jumping in has a good will but can't swim. Okay, but if we are just considering the happiness of the drowning person, it really doesn't matter that he was just saved out of a selfish desire for a reward or whatever. What matters for his happiness or his suffering is that he was saved, right? Or likewise, the example I gave with someone curing cancer. Okay, maybe he did it only for the money or for the Nobel Prize. Maybe he didn't really care about saving people's life. But if you or your loved ones have cancer, it's not like you will really care when taking the medicine whether the original inventor of that medicine who discovered it was a moral person or not. What matters for your happiness is the outcome. So when it comes to the doctrine of prudence, the doctrine of happiness, there is only the letter of the action, Kant says. An action either works in regard to producing happiness or it doesn't work. It either causes some sort of pleasure or some sort of pain, or at least as an in-between, it doesn't bring pleasure nor pain. But it doesn't matter what was intended. But when it comes to morality, that is different. Here, the outcome doesn't really matter. I mean, of course, it matters. Of course, we want there to be a good outcome. But if you're just judging whether someone is a moral person, whether someone is good or not, then the outcome doesn't matter. Someone could be constantly failing. Someone could never achieve anything good in the world and still be the best, the morally purest person who ever lived. And that goes to show that any supposed moral philosophy that is about happiness, so any sort of consequentialism in general, because consequentialism is what we call principles that are about, well, the consequences of an action, that are about the outcome. And then let's say it's the most well-known form of consequentialism, utilitarianism, which does say do whatever brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number, or whatever prevents the greatest suffering to the greatest number. That clearly is not a moral philosophy. It's not a wrong moral philosophy, it's no moral philosophy at all. Because it is superficial, it only cares about the outside, the happiness. It only cares about calculating the best outcome, calculating whatever works, and not about your actual inner ethos. And this aspect of Kant's moral philosophy shows that it is an aufklärt moral philosophy. Because the ethos, or what I like in my philosophy to call the posture, or maybe you could say the stance, or maybe, if you will, the attitude, that is what Aufklärung is about. Because Aufklärung, after all, means leading yourself as opposed to being led by someone or something else. And most people, when they hear that, think only about other people leading you. That's why they will say, oh, I don't believe everything that the media tells me or that experts tell me, so I must be an aufklärt person. But that is really just the smallest part. Aufklärung is not only about other people not leading you, it is also about your own sensuality not leading you. Thinking for yourself means not just not having your thoughts led by other people around you, it also means not having your thoughts led and directed by your own sensuality, by your own desires, and so on. And sensuality, as I have already explained several times in previous lectures, sensuality by Kant is defined as receptiveness. So we are sensual insofar as we are passive, insofar as we are affected by something. Right? I look at a red object and I see red. I have the sensation of red. Or I eat something sweet and I have the sensation of sweetness. It's not something I myself bring forth. That's what thinking is to Kant. Thinking is not, or intellectuality is not receptiveness, it's spontaneity. So it is about self-activeness, bringing forth something myself. Of course, my thoughts can be about my sensations, about what I received through my senses, but as such, as thoughts, they still come from me. I'm still being self-active and not just passively taking in however I'm affected. So Kant says sensuality is receptiveness. And now think about what is it you receive what is it you have sensations of, what is it you have perceptions of? Well, it is the latter, right? When you read a text, the spirit, you don't read the spirit, you read the letter. The spirit is something you have to think about and actively interpret. And likewise, when people are acting in the world, what you perceive is just that, the actions. Like you perceive, oh, this guy stays at the shore, this other guy jumps in and swims over to save the drowning person. That's what you perceive. That is the sensual part. And therefore, it's not the part that matters. What matters is the inner ethos. What matters is, does somebody have a good will or not? And this is something you can never perceive, but rather you can only think. And once again, this is what aufklärt thinking is about. Not just when it comes to morality, but to anything. Anything of importance must be understood as a posture. Like, take religion. All that you perceive is someone, I don't know, praying, going to church, or saying, I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, whatever. But the true religiosity is not what somebody claims to be, or what opinions someone holds, or what cult actions someone does, but rather it's an inner posture, something you can think but not perceive. And since we don't live in an aufklärt world, since we live in a very unaufklärt world, people often ignore the importance of posture. Again, take the example of religion, where it's often just about these outer cult actions conforming with some meaningless commandments. And they only look at the outer actions because they don't think for themselves. They are being led by their senses. They go by what they see, what they hear. And so when it comes to morality, we are often obsessed with mere outer decency, with following some rules of conduct, and we don't ask, what is the inner ethos somebody has? Is somebody acting with goodwill? I mean, that is what political correctness is about, right? They ask, is someone following the rules of decent conduct? Like, is someone using the right words, yeah, whatever the right words of the day are? Now you cannot say Nigo anymore. Now you say colored person, and now you cannot say colored person. You say black person, and now you say you don't say black person, you say person of color, but not colored person. That's completely different for some reason that nobody can understand. That's the point of political correctness. It is just about the letter. Do you conform with the letter of whatever rules of conduct we made up? And if you don't, you get cancelled. And to be clear here, this is not a left-wing phenomenon. Recent years, everyone acted like cancel culture, political correctness, like that's a left thing. But the truth is that any ideology has its own form of political correctness. Of course, they disagree on what the rules of decent conduct are, but what they do agree in is this general attitude of not asking about someone's inner will, but only about, does he follow whatever rules we think need to be followed. Like, a right-winger, sure, will not cancel you because you said, I don't know, gypsy instead of Roma, but he will probably cancel you because you didn't sing or didn't stand up at the national anthem being played. Again, not asking about your inner attitude, your posture, asking if you are a true patriot or somebody who hates the state or whatever, but just going by, oh, you didn't sing, so you get cancelled. And especially in recent times, we could see that very clearly when people criticize Israel, when people say Israel is an apartheid regime, which I mean is not an opinion, it's a fact, right? The international court has ruled on that, and even before that, all humanitarian organizations, including those in Israel itself, like Bet Salem, were in agreement on that. And I mean, you just have to look at the West Bank. When there's one group of people that can vote and one that can't vote, or when there are whole streets that are closed off to Palestinians, so Palestinians cannot drive there, only walk, but Israelis can drive, or even streets where they can't even walk, even if they live at that street. So their front door leading onto the street is actually barred, and they have to enter and leave their own house by climbing over the roof. The only way you cannot call that apartheid is if either you are ignorant and don't know, but then you should at least know that you don't know and refrain from making a judgment, refrain from attacking people for saying it is apartheid, or if you are so blinded by ideology that you stop being a human being, that you cannot be taken seriously anyway. But the point is, if people say this is apartheid or this is genocide, which again is not an opinion, like it's just not open to debate. You can either agree with it or be an evil person that needs to be discarded as an evil person. But there is no way a discussion about that is possible. All serious scholars of genocide, including Jewish Israeli scholars like Ras Segal, Amos Goldberg, Omar Bartov, they're all in agreement on this. So it's not a matter of opinion, but still, when you say these things, you get attacked as an anti-Semite. And the point here too is this happens not so much from the left, but from the right. So they have their own political correctness, and it is politically incorrect to say Israel is committing genocide. But they too don't ask what kind of person is that person who said that. Is that person really someone who hates Jews? Like, what is their inner posture? I mean, listen to someone like Francesca Albanese, who in every other interview talks about how she was shocked when she first was called an anti-Semite, how she's disgusted by anti-Semitism, who in her youth as a student fought against a plate memorizing an Italian fascist who had created laws against Jews. But this doesn't matter to those who are only about political correctness. They don't care about the will a person hath. They only care about the outer actions. And if certain actions don't conform with their rules of decent conduct, whether they are leftist rules or rightist rules or whatever, then that person is attacked. And of course, the mere fact that these people act as an aggressive mob, just attacking and canceling people, instead of actually looking closer, that alone shows that they are the ones who are evil, that they are the ones who lack true goodwill. To avoid misunderstandings, however, when I say, or when Kant says, that in morality it's not the action that matters, it's only the goodwill. Goodwill to Kant is not the same as good wishes or good intentions. I addressed in the lecture on the faculty of desiring, on choice and the will, I addressed that to Kant a wish is not the same as wanting something or desiring something, even though in everyday language we may use the word wish for any sort of desire. But to Kant, wish is just an empty desire. It's something that you can't or that you're not going to realize, like wishing to be immortal or wishing to fly or whatever. It is not enough to have good intentions. Just standing there and say, "Oh, I wish everything was good. I wish for world peace," or "I wish there wasn't any hunger on Earth." That doesn't make you a good person if you don't do anything about it. Kant would say that will, true will, is not something potential. Like there is nothing between will and action that makes you act. Rather, will itself is what makes you act. Because otherwise, what would that third thing in between be? If I want something and still I don't act to make it real, then that would mean that in order to start acting, I would first need to want what I already want. I would first need the will to realize my will. That makes no sense. No, the will itself is already the will for realization. Therefore, Kant says, when we have a true will, not just an empty wish, then we do whatever we can to realize that will. So, while actions as such are not good or bad, are not what morality is about, while it is just about the will will lead to actions. So let's go back to the example from the beginning. Let's say the person who can't swim. Sure, he will stay at the shore. He will not jump into the lake trying to swim over and save the drowning person because he can't. But if he still has a good will, if he really doesn't jump in just because he can't swim, but he would like to jump in if he could, then he will not just stand at the shore and say, "Oh, I wish I could save that drowning person, but too bad, he's gonna drown." But rather, he's gonna try anything he can. He's gonna look around if maybe there's a boat that he can use to quickly drive over, or if maybe there's someone else, some passerby or some lifeguard that he can alert, and then that other person can swim over. Maybe he will try to call the life savers, whatever. He will try anything he can if he really has that goodwill. So to Kant, it really is just about the will, not the action as such. The action as such is not good or evil. So even to go with something drastic and extreme, even if you killed a person, bathed in his blood, ate him, or even if you raped a child or whatever, if you could be doing that out of goodwill, out of reverence for humanity, then there would be nothing wrong with those actions. And don't be too shocked by me saying that, because the important point here is the if you could do that out of goodwill. The point is, of course, that you can't. That these are actions that could be done maybe out of some twisted sensual desires, but never out of goodwill. But it's not the actions as such, and it's not because they may cause harm or pain that they are evil, but they are evil precisely because they cannot possibly originate from a good will. But if they could, they would not be wrong. Anything that can come from a good will, anything that can be done out of reverence is good, and anything that cannot is evil. And again, if you have that goodwill, you will act accordingly as much as you can. It's not enough to have good intentions. Like, imagine someone said, "Oh, I have the intention to save sick people, I want to perform surgery," but then just went and randomly, without knowing what he's doing, cut people open, thereby causing more harm, more damage than helping. That would not be a good person. If you really don't just mean well, but really want well, then you would be responsible about it. You would do your very best to do it as well as you can. So you would try to study medicine first if you want to be a surgeon, to learn. And even after having studied medicine, you would probably try to always practice the steadiness of your hand, or to always keep learning, to learn additional medical knowledge to get better and better. That would be what goodwill would lead you to do. And that's important because we have, of course, many people who may have good intentions, good wishes in this world, who will say, oh, I wish there was world peace, or I'm against exploitation, I'm against child labor, I'm against the climate crisis. But then they will not do anything about it. Or they even will do anything about it in the sense of they will make it worse, they will contribute to it, they will go shop at Amazon again, even though the workers there are exploited. They will go buy new fast fashion, thereby supporting slave labor, child labor. They will fly on vacation, thereby contributing to the climate emergency. Because they may have good intentions in their head, but it's not something that really penetrates them deep down. It's not a true ethos. It's not a true goodwill. It's just they think about it and say, oh, this would be nice if the world was a better place. But they don't really have the will for it, because the will always tries to realize itself. That's very important to Kant. That's precisely why in the previous lecture on why compassion and a good heart don't make a good person, I talked about one issue being that people may think they are good simply for feeling compassion, simply for looking at the evil of the world and feeling bad about it. But you feeling bad is no proof that you are a good person. It's just a proof that you are a sympathetic, a sentimental person by your nature, which is not a moral quality. No, if you really are a good person, you will not just feel bad and whine and lament, you will actually act. One of Kant's favorite quotes, so Kant, in his youth, in his school, he learned Latin, he had to study the ancient Roman authors, and he liked several of them very much, and even in later age he could quote many lines from memory. And one of his favorite quotes is "Tu si ex animo velis bonum, adas operam, sola cadaver est voluntas," which roughly means, you who wants the good out of your soul, add action. Mere wanting is just a corpse. Now, since this is the case for Kant, since to him actual will, as opposed to empty wishes or intentions, actual will always lead to actions. For that reason, Kant says someone who has a specific will can be judged as already or successfully having done the action that springs from that will. Even if he has not completed the action yet, or even if he doesn't get to complete it at all, even if the action fails, he can be judged, and he ought to be treated and considered as if he had successfully done that action. So if you jump into the water to save the drowning person and you swim over there and you do your best to reach him, you swim as fast as you can, you don't hesitate at all, but still you don't reach that person, still he drowns before you reach him, there's really no rational reason to beat yourself up over it. It wouldn't have made you a morally better person if you had reached him, and it doesn't make you a morally less good person that you didn't, because what counts is your will. Actually reaching that person and actually pulling him out, that is an action in the sensual world, in the world of appearance. And that is ultimately about happiness, about that person's whom you are saving happiness. But when it just comes to judging your own morality, it really doesn't matter whether you succeed or not. You are an equally good person in both cases. Or likewise, if two people jump into the water and try to swim over and save that person, let's say one of them reaches the person first and is the one who pulls him out. He's not a morally better person than the second one. And there's no rational reason to be any less grateful to the second one. The second one should also be considered as if he saved that person's life, because it's not because the fact that he didn't end up saving that person's life is not because he's less moral than the one who did, but just because he was less fast, because he was there second. And of course, this also goes for evil actions. Kant would say that an attempted murderer, in the moral sense, is a murderer. Let's say you plan a murder and you really, really want to murder that person, but you just fail in the end, or you get caught before you get to murder him and you get jailed, then the fact that you failed, the fact that you were found out, does not make you a better person, and if you had succeeded, on the other hand, you would not be a worse person. What matters, when we are judging just your morality, what matters is the will you had. Even someone who didn't even go so far as planning the murder could be a murderer. Kant would say there are people who, in the physical sense, have never hurt a single hair on anybody, and still, in a moral sense, are murderers. If you want to murder your neighbor and you truly hate him and truly want him dead and would not hesitate if you just knew that you could get away with it and no one would ever know, then you should be considered as if you already had murdered him. And maybe you never even try, because there's never an opportunity, because you are more afraid of being found out and going to jail. Still, you should, in a moral sense, be considered and judged as if you had murdered him. The important thing, however, is that Kant says this goes only for moral judging, and moral judging must be left to God, because only God can look into the hearts. Only God can know your true will. This does not go for legal judging. So a human judge who judges not according to moral law but according to the law of the respective state, it's not his job to judge you by your will, but it's his job to judge you by your actions. The state, and that's an important difference between justice and morality, the state cares only about the outside, only about the actions, not about the will. Like, if you are a good citizen, never breaking any law, never murdering anybody, and your neighbor is the same, also a good citizen, also never breaking any law, it might be that you are completely different in a moral sense. It might be that your neighbor is only following the laws because he's fearing jail, but if there was no punishment, he would totally go on a killing spree, while you, on the other hand, would not kill even if there was no such law. You do it because you truly have reverence for humanity. The state doesn't care for that. what's going on inside of you is your own business. The state, the police, the courts cannot know it anyways. And the state just wants our actions. It just wants legality of actions. It doesn't care about morality of the inner ethos. And Kant says that it is right and correct that when it comes to our common laws, a judge should treat an attempted murder different from an actual successful murder. Because we don't really know if you really had the will to murder, unless you really did murder. If you just plan a murder, if you go to your would-be victim's house with a knife in your hand, or with a gun or whatever, maybe you have the intention of murdering, maybe you have the wish for that person to be gone, but you don't truly have the evil will. Maybe in the last second, standing over your victim with the gun in your hand, you would get scruples. Your conscience would awaken, and you could not bring yourself to do it. Because maybe you are not as bad of a person as you seem to be, after all. We cannot know if you would have gone through with it. And for that reason, if you didn't kill that person, if, let's say, the police caught you at the door when you were about to enter with gun in hand, we don't know if you would have gone through with it. And that's why Kant says it's correct that an attempted murderer gets less punishment than an actual murderer. But this is just the human court. This is just the legal court. But in the court of God, God knows whether you would have gone through with it. God knows whether it was just the police being there at the right moment that stopped you, or whether you would have stopped yourself. So God will judge you by what you would have done, not by what you actually did, because God judges you by your will. And for that reason, someone could have never harmed anyone in the slightest way. Someone could always have acted legally, always acted correctly, and still go to hell, and still deserve going to hell, because inwardly maybe he was the most evil, the most selfish, the most disregarding person, and it just so happened that his selfish calculations told him it's the most prudent thing to not act on it, it's the most prudent thing to respect the laws. He would deserve going to hell just like the worst actual murderer would. And with all of this, with this morality, treating the will as if the action was already done, Kant is completely in accordance with the morality of the Bible, where Jesus says, he who wants to break marriage with his neighbor's wife already has done so. It is just important, Kant would say, that we interpret this statement of Jesus correctly. Because it is not about intentions, it is not about wishes, it is not about desires. We are not responsible for our sensuality as such. So just having, let's say, intrusive thoughts or certain desires and inclinations, that doesn't mean that we are evil and that we basically already committed the action in our mind, but rather only if we have the will to act on it. So for an extreme example, I'm always bothered by pedophiles being equated with child rapists, and by people acting as if a pedophile was necessarily an evil person. That's of course not the case. You can be a pedophile and maybe the morally best person who ever lived. Many children, probably a majority, are raped not by actual pedophiles, Often it happens for other reasons, probably because children are easy victims. Like, to go with the cliche that the priest who rapes a child, um, he just has the opportunity to do so, and it's just easier to rape a child and get away with it rather than raping a grown up. But on the other hand, while many children are raped by non pedophiles, many pedophiles never harm children. There are even pedophiles who try very hard to fight their urges, who go to therapy, who take certain pills that lower your sexual desires. And the point here would be the pedophilia as such is not something you chose to have. It's just unlucky that you have sexual desires that you can never in a moral way live out and realize. So that in itself does not make you evil, and it's a shame that many pedophiles probably feel like monsters simply for having those desires that they didn't choose. And I think society should treat them better, also in the interest of the children, because we are not really helping the children if we drive those people, so to say, out of daylight into the underground. Because if they are alone with their desires, it's much more likely that they are gonna act on it. If they had a network of support, if they could come out to people without fear of immediately getting cancelled and ostracized, that would be better for the children too, because it would then be way more likely that they manage to deal with their urges. But anyways, the point is, just having those desires does not make a pedophile a bad person if he, through his reason, understands that acting on them would be wrong, and therefore makes himself not do it. That, as I explained in the lecture on what is freedom, that is what freedom is about for Kant. Freedom is not following our desires blindly like some animal, but rather following our own rational insight, following our own understanding of what is good and evil, even against our desires. On the other hand, however, if someone is a pedophile and doesn't just have these desires, but has no goodwill at all, has no qualms about acting according to those desires, but still never does, never touches a child, never watches child porn, but just because he's afraid of being found out and going to jail and ruining his life, but he would if he could get away with it, then once again, he should be treated not by a human judge who cannot know this surely anyways, but he should be treated by God as, and that also means by his own conscience to Kant, because as I will explain in another lecture, the conscience to Kant is really just the Holy Spirit, it's really just the voice of God inside of us. He should be treated and judged by God, by the Holy Spirit, by his own conscience, as if he had already committed these acts. And all of this maybe shines more light on my previous two lectures on why compassion and a good heart don't make a good person, and on the significance of having character and being principled. Because that's what the goodwill is about. Having the right principles, doing something because it is your duty and for no other reasons, not because you feel like it, not because your feeling of compassion and pity compels you to. And Kant is not such a naive cynic that he would say that all people or most people are acting bad and selfishly all the time. Because to be clear here, this is the cynical position, and the cynics, they like to act and to think of themselves as if they were the realistic ones, who look at the world as it really is, and everyone else, everyone who says no, people are not always completely bad and looking out only for themselves, everyone else is naive. But really, it's this cynicism which is naive and which betrays that someone has no real knowledge of how humans are like, but rather is probably driven by some ideology or by some sensitivities, and it's kind of childish. Like, it's a view you might have during your puberty. Oh, everyone, it's an edgy view. Everyone is just in it for themselves. No. This cynic position, even if it pretends to be, is not a realistic position. The realistic position is to realize, as Kant does, that many people are somewhat good-natured or good-hearted to some degree. But what he does say is that most don't have a good character, most don't have a truly good will. They do good actions more out of convenience or out of feeling, but not out of a good will. But to Kant, this is really how it should be. This is really what matters. And he drills that into his students also in his lectures. Like, for example, when it comes to marriage, Kant would say, and this might at first sound not so nice, not so romantic, but I think it has a lot of merit to it. Kant says, you should not treat your wife well because you love her, because love is fleeting. Love might go away. If you only treat her well because you love her, that means if you stop loving her, you will start treating her shitty. But rather the other way around. Because she is your wife, you should treat her lovingly. You should feel duty bound to treat her lovingly. Just think about it. If you have a partner and your partner tells you, oh, I won't cheat on you, and you ask, why not? Like, what assurance can you give me? What is your reason not to cheat? And let's say your partner says, oh, you are so attractive, you're more attractive than anyone else, no one else could interest me. That might sound very flattering, but what if a more attractive person does come along after all? Or what if with age, let's say, your attractiveness goes away? Then your partner will cheat, if that's the only reason right now not to cheat. And even if your partner says, oh, it's not just that you are physically attractive, I won't cheat because I love you and I don't want to hurt you. Again, the love may go away. And then maybe the partner will not divorce, maybe because of the house or the children or the dog or whatever, but may still have an affair on the side. So you should prefer for an answer if the partner said, I won't cheat on you because it will be wrong. Even if I won't be sexually attracted to you anymore, even if I won't love you anymore, at most I will first break up with you and then seek another, but I won't just cheat on you behind your back because that would be wrong. May not be the most romantic answer, but this, the will of a person, this is what you can truly count on. If a person acts on sensual desires, on whims, on feelings, they are fleeting, they are ever changing. Firmness is only in character, in acting out of principles. If a person truly decided to act in a certain way, which is not the same as choosing. The choice might be determined again by your sensuality, but if it really was your own decision, making yourself be that way, that's the only thing you can really count on. And for that reason, Kant, in a rather well-known quote, he says,
if nature has put little sympathy in the heart of this or that man, if he, supposed to be an upright man, is by temperament cold and indifferent to the sufferings of others, perhaps because in respect of his own he is provided with the special gift of patience and fortitude, and supposes or even requires that others should have the same. And such a man would certainly not be the meanest product of nature. But if nature had not specially framed him for a philanthropist, would he not still find in himself a source from whence to give himself a far higher worth than that of a good-natured temperament could be? Unquestionably, it is just in this that the moral worth of the character is brought out, which is incomparably the highest of all, namely, that he is beneficent, not from inclination, but from duty.
Now, thinking about this philosophy of Kant's, you may ask, wait, but if the goodness of a person cannot be judged by that person's actions, but only by his will, but if the will is something supersensual, something that doesn't appear, it's the actions that are the appearances of the will, right? The will manifests and realizes itself in certain actions, but those actions could also be the appearance of something else. Something else could be manifesting itself in the same actions. So if the will cannot be perceived, doesn't it mean that we can never truly know whether another person is good or evil? The answer is yes. That's completely right. We cannot know, according to Kant. But to him, that is actually that's not something bad. I would say that's not a failure of his moral philosophy. That's rather one of its perks. Consider at first that many people will think they are good because they have good opinions or they do good actions nowadays. And maybe they are even right that these opinions and these actions are right. But the question is, do they really hold them and do they really do them because they are right or just because they've been taught? Like today, everyone wants to be against racism. Even the racists claim they are not racist and get mad when you call them racist. And it's not just performance, it's not just lies. Many of them really do mean it. So everyone nowadays, or at least many people, will say, oh, racism is bad. And looking back at the past, people are very, very fast to judge. Lots of people from the past, including Kant, get cancelled by certain groups. They will say, oh, look at what he wrote. He was such a racist and such a sexist and an anti-Semite and so on and so on and so on. And maybe some of the things that people like Kant or others from his age wrote are indeed racist. I'm not saying that what they wrote is necessarily right or unproblematic. I will give a lecture at a later point about whether or in what way Kant was a racist or not. But my point is this: those people that are so quick, so easy to cancel, are they really better just because they hold better opinions, less racist opinions? What would they have been like had they lived in that age? But they cannot possibly claim that the way you are raised and socialized and what you're being taught by your society, that is a moral quality. Like, that is not your own fault or your own merit. What you do with it, whether you just accept the prejudices you're taught or whether you question it, that's another matter. But what you're taught as such, that's not your fault. So how many of those people who nowadays are quick to cancel everyone who in their mind is even slightly racist, how many of those, had they lived in the 30s and the 40s, would have followed the Nazis? Yeah, nowadays you get taught in school that racism is bad. But back then, you would have been taught race theory. So if the only reason you're against racism is because you were taught, and this is now the trendy, the progressive thing to do, then it stands to reason that back then, had you been taught something else, back then, when it was the trend to be a racist, you would have been one of the racists. So maybe you should be more careful. Maybe you should be less quick to judge. This is precisely why I always suggest that to determine how moral someone is, or even more generally how aufklärt someone is, you mustn't look whether he conforms with what is now the common opinion that everyone accepts, because it's really it's no big achievement to agree with everyone, to just go along with the herd. Rather, you have to look at the correct or the morally good opinions or actions that are not widely accepted. So, for example, if nowadays someone supports LGBTQ rights, well, so what? That doesn't say you're a good person. This is just commonly accepted now. Only since very recently. I still remember, and of course in different societies it's different. Like in many societies it's still very much not accepted. I'm speaking mostly from a German perspective here. But I still remember when I was younger, it was still a very normal thing to say for people, oh, I have nothing against gay people, as long as they leave me alone. There was even a verb in German. Like you would say, I have nothing against gay people as long as they don't gay me. Like as long as they don't try anything with me, basically. This was a totally accepted thing to say in my youth, and now it's not anymore. So things can change very quickly, and funnily enough, people themselves can forget the opinions they used to hold just 10 or 20 years ago. But the thing is, if nowadays you accept gay people, we cannot really tell if you do because you are good and you really understand that this is the right thing to do, or because you are just a mindless drone who accepts whatever the majority happens to accept. So I would rather ask, how do you feel about incest? And here you will find that many of the people who are the loudest advocates for LGBTQ rights will, without thinking, treat it as the most natural and correct thing to be against incest and to be for incest staying illegal. And the same people who will say that you are a terrible homophobic person if, let's say, you say two men kissing is gross to you. Like, there are people who will say, I accept it, I won't forbid it, they can do what they want, it's their life, but just personally I find it gross to look at. That's still a stupid opinion if you ask me, sure, like, what's gross about people kissing? I mean, you don't have to take part in the kissing, but still, people who say being gay should be legal just on a personal level, I find it gross, they still get attacked by certain leftists as being terrible homophobic people. But then those same leftists will, without thinking, say, oh, two siblings kissing, that's so gross. And not see anything wrong with saying that. And when I meet such people, I will immediately lose all respect. I will immediately think, okay, had you lived, let's say, in the 70s, 80s, you would also have been against homosexuality, and you would also have said that's gross. And likewise, especially here in Germany, of course, everyone nowadays is against the Holocaust. It's not an accomplishment to be in 2025 as a German to be against the Holocaust. Like, if you get one thing drilled into you in school, it's the Nazis were evil, you mustn't be a Nazi, you must support the Jews, you must be against the Holocaust. But precisely for that reason, it doesn't show that you wouldn't have been a Nazi back then. Like, it's just not a very likely thing that somehow 100 years ago the majority of Germans born were born as anti-Semites, and somehow now the majority of Germans that are born, the majority of their grandchildren, are somehow born as morally better people. Like, it's not very likely. What is more likely is that 100 years ago, just as now, most Germans are just mindless and unaufklärt, and they go with whatever they are taught. And okay, maybe luckily they are now taught something better than their grandparents were. They are now taught not anti-Semitism, but that anti-Semitism is evil. Okay. But that's not their own moral accomplishment. You cannot pat someone on the back for being taught something. The question is, what is someone's will? Does someone have the will to just follow the herd and to just unthinkingly go with whatever they are taught? Then they must be treated as if they had been one of the Nazis. Because they would have been if they had just been born earlier. And being born late is not a moral accomplishment, once again. Or does someone have the will to think for himself, to question what he is taught, to come to his own conclusions? And again, you can tell very easily by not asking a German, do you support the Holocaust or are you against the Holocaust? Because here we have been taught. But rather, ask about other racism. Because we only get taught that racism against Jews is bad. I mean, of course, there are some general lessons about, racism in general is evil, but it doesn't get emphasized in the same way. So you can even stay with the Nazis and just look at their other victims. If you want to easily see what a big scam German memory culture is and how it's just performative, but we have learned nothing from history, you just have to consider the fact that the other victims of the Nazis don't matter at all to us. Like, sure, the Nazis murdered Jews, but that was not their only genocide. They also murdered the Roma. And let me tell you, no one, absolutely no one, ever talks about the Roma in Germany. Like, maybe it's some footnote somewhere, but you don't get talked in school about it all the time, and politicians don't hold speeches about it all the time, and we don't have a giant memorial to the murdered Roma right next to the Brandenburg Gate in the heart of Berlin. It's just not a thing. And there's still, of course, just like in other countries in Europe, a lot of disgusting racism against Roma people. So most of the time they just don't factor in, like, nobody even considers their existence most of the time. And the very same German politicians who will drone on and on and on about Israel's right to exist and how it's German reason of state that we must support Israel no matter what, and that you are an anti-Semite if you say that Israel is a settler colonial country. I've never heard any of those politicians say, the Roma people, they were always persecuted in history, they were always the victims of terrible racism, and then finally the Nazis tried to genocide them all, So the only way for the Roma people to be safe is to have their own country. So we should conquer the regions in northern India where they came from. They may have come from there and migrated from there many, many centuries ago, but I mean, still less time than the Jews left Palestine in antiquity. So why not put them back there and conquer that country, colonize it, let them subjugate the now native population there. And we as Germans have a historical responsibility to support that Roma state. It should be our reason of state. You just don't hear that. It's not something anyone suggests. So, and of course, this also goes for other people. Like the Nazis also wanted to exterminate tons of Slavic people. But still, there's lots of racism against Slavs, and nobody really cares about that. But then, if you go beyond the immediate victims of the Nazis, it becomes even more obvious. I mean, Germany is extremely racist against Mohammedans. It's at this point, it's basically the only political topic there is in Germany. In the recent election, half of the Germans, if you're very, very generous, voted for racist Nazi politics. Again, if you're generous, it's actually more than half because the center left parties, they basically take part in the racist politics, so their voters should be counted too, really. And in polls, it was the most important question was refugees to most people. So most people basically said in the polls, I'm a complete idiot and I'm a climate change denier. Because I mean, it's not a matter of opinion, right? Refugees are certainly not our most pressing issue. Even if they were a pressing issue, they could not possibly be the most pressing issue, and they are not even number 10 or whatever. We have tons of other more important issues, of course. So there's a lot of racism against, let's say, Syrians or Afghans or whatever, and this is totally acceptable. Like I've read people uh, who would cancel you for daring to even say the mildest criticism of Israel. I've read those same people saying stuff like, "Oh, I hate those Arab animals." Like there's an obscene number of people who have been cancelled and lost their jobs or didn't receive some award because they criticized Israel, and then you have, for example, a TV moderator who said about the Palestinians in Gaza that animals have more dignity than these idiots, and sure, she received some criticism, but she posted that on Twitter, and the state TV channel where she's employed basically just replied to the criticism. Oh, she said that as a private person, we are not responsible for that. Which I'm pretty sure they would not have said if she had said it about Israelis, that animals have more dignity than these idiots. And I mean, when it comes to Mohammedans, it's just very much obvious that they are the new global Jew of the 21st century. I mean, if you take a step back, if you don't look at just one specific country like Germany, but if you look at the earth as a whole, um, even aside from the fact that, of course, Arabs are Semites and their religion is a Semitic religion, so this is really just a new form of anti Semitism. But if you look globally, it's clear that they are the most hated, the most persecuted, the most attacked group, whether it's refugees and immigrants in Europe, whether it's the Palestinians, whether it's in India and Kashmir. There are several genocides happening right now on Earth, and not all. There's of course the genocide committed against the Ukrainian people that we mustn't ever forget. But the majority of those genocides is, of course, committed against Mohammedans. Whether it's the genocide happening in Sudan, whether it's the genocide happening in Palestine, whether it's the genocide of the Rohingya in Myanmar, who already several years ago have been called by the UN the most persecuted minority on earth. Whether it's the genocide of the Uyghur people in China. So it's very clear that the Mohammedans are the new global Jew. So if you had really, as the Germans claim, if you had really learned from the past, then of course you would now support them, which Germans don't do. And if Germany had really learned not just that the Holocaust was bad, because the Holocaust is done. Like, we have been taught never again Auschwitz. This is really not a lesson you need to teach anyone. There will never be again Auschwitz. This is not how history works. It will probably never happen again. This is like, I can't see the future, but I think this is very likely that it will not happen again, that the German Empire commits a genocide against Jews in Auschwitz. This is just way too specific. History doesn't repeat in this way. So the real lesson, of course, should have been being against genocide and whether somebody, or being for human rights more broadly, and whether somebody learned that lesson, you can always tell by asking, what's your position on the genocide that you have not yet been taught is evil? Which right now would mainly be the genocide of the Palestinians, of course, and there most Germans support it, or at least are not really against it, or at least are more against those people who are against it than against those people who commit it. So why would I think that they are any better than their Nazi grandparents? They are clearly not. And I'm not saying that their grandchildren will be better. Like in 50 years, maybe children will be taught in school, oh yeah, the genocide against the Palestinians, that was totally evil, that should not have happened. And maybe in 50 years somewhere else, some other genocide will happen, committed by us or by our partners, by our allies. And those kids who will be very much against the Holocaust and very much against the Gaza genocide will then once again support the new genocide. So my point is, always ask, if you want to determine someone's, including your own, morality, not is he on board with the things, with the moral opinions that are basically commonly accepted now, but rather what's his position in cases where the moral opinion is not currently accepted. And this is, of course, this sort of mind is, of course, not a new one. I mean, you have that even in the Bible, right? The Jews back then, the Mosians, the Pharisees, saying, oh, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, or if the prophets came back nowadays, we would not kill the prophets. Like our forefathers committed grave sin when they persecuted and imprisoned and stoned the prophets, but we would not do that anymore. Well, it's true that if those specific prophets came back, like if you met Jeremiah or Hezekiel or whatever, then yeah, sure, you would listen to them, because you have been taught this is a prophet from God. But the question is, would you recognize a new prophet, and would you listen to him rather than persecute him? And clearly the example of Jesus showed that they didn't. And then, of course, the Christians are no better. Of course, a Christian would say, if I back then had lived, I would not have been amongst those who crucified Jesus. I would have followed him. Well, did you follow Muhammad when he came about? Or were you amongst those who drove him out of Mecca? And as for the Mohammedans, of course, you will say, oh, I would have gone with Muhammad from Mecca to Medina. I would not have driven him out. I would not have been amongst those pagans. Really? Are you so sure? I'm not so sure. I think there's many grounds to believe. I mean, just ask how many Mohammedans in our day followed the Swedish prophet, and the Quran already says that every people, every language will have its prophet. Greta Thunberg, when she said basically the very, very same message that every prophet in the Quran says, because the Quran says prophets are just warners, and they basically just say, stop your evil ways or you will be fucked. Start turning around, start being good. It's the only way you can save yourself. Same message nowadays. I don't see many Mohammedans listening. So it's really always the same. You can see if someone really is aufklärt, really thinking for himself, really having a good will, by not asking, okay, do you follow what you've been taught? But what about the cases where you have not been taught yet? Where you still need to make your own judgment. And then it's not looking good for most people. Like, how can you honestly tell yourself, oh, I would not have been amongst those who said, I knew nothing of the Holocaust. If only I known, then I would have been against it. If you are not now against the genocide in Gaza, for example, because I mean, even back then, it was a lie. Of course, they knew. Everyone knew. Just recently, I saw a film about one Holocaust survivor, Marione Ingram, who now lives in the US, who is a quite remarkable person because she has always fought for justice. Like when she came after the Holocaust to the US, she fought in the civil rights movement for the rights of the black people, and later she fought against the war in Vietnam. And now she fights for the Palestinians, and she has actually been cancelled in Germany. Last year she was supposed to speak at 8 schools in her old home city of Hamburg, and that was actually cancelled. So that is what we learned from the Holocaust. We are now actually canceling Holocaust survivors. Like you can't make this shit up. But the point is, she talked about her childhood memories, and she had a German friend, another girl, when she was 3 or 4 years old, that she played with, until one day that girl said, I'm going to not play with you anymore because you're a dirty Jew pig, and you and your family will go up in smoke. And when I heard that, it was one of those moments when I, not for the first time in my life, thought, you all knew. Like this statement, oh, we didn't know. So how did a 3 or 4 year old girl know? Because I'm pretty sure she didn't just randomly make this up. She must have heard that from some grown up. If even the little kids knew, everyone knew. But my point is, even back then, this was not a good excuse. But now, when we have the first live stream genocide of history, it's an even less good excuse. You can easily, even here on YouTube, with a few clicks, you can see it all. You can see Israeli soldiers chanting, there are no uninvolved civilians, or you can see them dancing around in the underwear of Palestinian women that they drove away or murdered. None of this is hidden. None of this is any secret. So the only way you don't know about it is if you don't want to know it, if you don't care, if you look away on purpose. In other words, if you don't have goodwill. And this is precisely why when people are so quick to cancel people from the past, I will always say, be careful. Be very careful. You don't know how the future will look back at you, and how favorably they will look at you. And also for this reason, the aufklärt, the rational person will have no taste and no patience for most debates and for most political fights, because it's just like a football game where everyone supports his team. Even if people happen to be on the right side, it's just a lucky coincidence in most cases, but it's not because they necessarily are good people who thought about it and came to the right conclusion. Um, if you manage to step out of your own prejudices and ideologies just for a second and to look at things from the outside, you will quickly realize how much of what people think or believe is really just a product of their surroundings, of how they grew up. In other words, it's not something they are morally responsible for. I mean, let's stay with the issue of Palestine. Here where I live, I'm surrounded by lots of Turkish or Arabic immigrants, and sure, they will say, "Oh, this is genocide. Oh, the Palestinians are being oppressed." Um, but then go to one of those Turkish guys and ask him about the Kurds, and ask him not about Hamas. He will probably defend Hamas. He will say, "Oh, Hamas is not a terror organization. Hamas, they are freedom fighters." Ask them about the PKK. He will say, "Oh, terrorists. Oh, the Kurdish people, they should just stop whining. They are not being oppressed in Turkey. No, they don't serve their own country." I have seen Turks saying, um, when Turkey fought a war against the Kurds in eastern Turkey and in Syria and Iraq, um, "Oh, this is not a war because Kurds have no country and no land, and you can't fight a war against people without a country." I mean, this is one for one what an Israeli could say about the Palestinians. And in that case, the Turkish guy would probably attack the Israeli for it. It always boggles me how little self reflection unaufklärt people have. They truly don't realize this. They truly don't. I don't know how they cannot realize it. I'm truly incapable of lying to myself in that way, in that degree. But they can do it, apparently. And then if you go on, then you have many Germans supporting Israel. Why? Because they've been talked to. Because it's reason of state, as Chancellor Merkel said at one infamous speech. And then I ask such Germans, look, the Irish people, the majority of Irish people supports Palestine. Assuming you Germans are right, assuming you're on the right side, assuming Israel is in the right here. So, does it just so happen that Germans are morally better people on average than Irish people? Does it just so happen that all the Irish are born as evil? Does it just so happen that Ireland is a particularly anti Semitic country? Like we know the great history of anti Semitism in Ireland, right? Comes even before Germany. Or maybe it's just for reasons of history. Because the Irish, of course, they themselves were victims of settler colonialism. They themselves were victims of genocide. This is important to remind people of sometimes, right? There is this very superficial and very easy, simple black and white dichotomy for many leftists that here there are the evil white people and there are the poor people of color who have always been suppressed and white people have always been the oppressors, never the victims, and there is no such thing as racism against white people. Um, well, even when you say that, the problem is who is a white person. Maybe there is no racism against white people because if you're being racist against someone, you're just saying they are not white. But who is and who isn't white can easily change. Like nowadays, Jews are basically white. They didn't used to be in the time of the Nazis. Same goes for Slavs, right? And same goes for Irish. Of course, white people, be it in Ireland, be it in Poland, be it in Ukraine, have also been victims of colonialism and of racism. Um, but be that as it may, on the other hand, it's also stupid. Like I read in the pro-Palestine community and pro-Palestine comment sections under videos, or from Palestinians, I read many people saying, "Oh, praise to the Irish! The Irish are such good people. It's such a great nation because they support Palestine." So I asked the same question in reverse: is it really likely that the Irish are better people than the Germans on average? No, it's just that they have been taught differently. I don't think the average Irish or German person is better or worse than the other. Like, take one out of his country as a baby, let him be raised in the other country, and the Irish person will also support Israel, and the German person will also support Palestine. And then if you go on, you have, of course, you have Arabs who support Palestine because they consider them their brothers. And then on the other hand, you have many people in Iran who support Israel simply because they are against their own regime, against the Ayatollahs. And the Ayatollahs, of course, are on the side of Hamas. And therefore, many of the Iranians who feel oppressed will be against the allies of their oppressors. And at some point, all of this just gets tiring. Like, at some point, if you yourself are somewhat aufklärt, you just notice that most people's opinions are just completely the product of their surrounding, of their upbringing, and so on. And even if they happen to be right, those opinions, it's just by coincidence. I cannot take seriously anyone who judges as a German person, or as an Irish person, or as an Iranian person, or as a Turkish person, let alone, of course, as an Israeli or Palestinian person. You can only be taken seriously if you judge as a human. If you abstract from being German or Irish or Iranian or Turkish or whatever, and just are a rational being, just asking your reason what is right, what is wrong. If you just speak not as yourself and not as this countryman, but speak only as the voice of reason. So if you, so to say, let God pronounce his judgment through your mouth instead of pronouncing your own judgment from your limitations. That's what Aufklärung is about. And that's what we can learn from Kant here. And if you are even somewhat aufklärt, you will therefore, as I said, you will get tired or disgusted by these debates, and you will not want to join in these political partisan debates anymore. Like around 20, you should start getting tired of this, and by, I would say, like around the mid of your 20s, you should be completely disgusted and turned off from this forever. If not, then I really don't see how you will ever be a truly aufklärt person if by that time you still haven't seen how empty all of this is, and how most people don't really have thoughts of their own, but just have the thoughts that they were given. And you should also realize that even the greatest evil, whether you partake in it or not, whether blood will be sticking to your hands or you will remain outwardly innocent is often just a matter of circumstance. Even when you consider something like the crimes of the Nazis, well, most people back then participated. So unless a new race of angels has now been born, it stands to reason that most current people, if they had been born and raised back then, would also have participated. I mean, Eichmann, who organized the Holocaust, excused himself by basically saying he just followed orders. Just so happened that he received evil orders from Hitler. He was ordered to put the Jews on trains that went to the concentration camps, but he could also have been ordered to send letters from the soldiers at the front to their families at home. It's not his fault that he received evil orders. He's not responsible for the orders he gets. He's of course responsible for following them or not following them. But the order as such, that's not his fault. And the remarkable thing was that at Kurt, Eichmann did not deny any of his actions as such. Like, he didn't say, oh, I didn't do it, you got the wrong guy, I didn't organize the Holocaust, I was not a big shot, I only had a very small role. No. He very, very openly and diligently even worked together with the Kurd and admitted to his deeds. But his point was that he said, I'm not responsible for any of them. I was just part of the machine, so to say, and anyone else could have been put. I was just unlucky to be put in that situation. Anyone else could have been put in the same situation and would have done the same thing. So basically, I'm as innocent, or everyone else is as guilty as me. And we should not just dismiss this argument. I think there's some merit to it. Now, I don't, of course, agree that everyone would have acted like Eichmann. We have examples of people who acted differently, and just one person, one single person, who did not take part in evil proves that all others also didn't have to do it. They also could have refused. But I think for many people it's true. The fact that a river that is being dammed does not flood the valley ahead is not because of the river. If the river had consciousness and free choice, we could not see the river is morally better than the river in the neighboring valley that has not been dammed and that has flooded that valley, because it's not out of the river's own moral choice that he's not flooding the valley. The moment the dam would break, that river would also flood its valley. And likewise, the fact that many people have not become murderers or have never joined in genocide is not because they are better people than those who did, but just because their life, their biography did not lead them there. And this is important. This is what we should always keep in mind. There are many people who outwardly are very decent people who never did anything wrong, who still at their core might be evil. If you are capable under any circumstances of committing some evil, then no matter how unlikely it is that those circumstances will ever come about, you should be judged as if you had done that evil. And I have known decent people who in some way or another eventually were tried by life and who failed that test, who very, very suddenly and abruptly switched from being oh so decent to doing quite evil things. And you cannot excuse yourself. I mean, if you think about it, thanks to modern technology, we are all being tried right now. We are in an ecological crisis, in a climate emergency. And most people are failing this test. Most people are taking part in it, mindlessly driving around in their car, mindlessly boarding planes, and so on, mindlessly consuming. And there may come a time in the near future when this will be considered the greatest crime in human history. This may sound shocking to some nowadays, especially here in Germany. It's not really something you can say because it would be considered relativizing the Holocaust, because clearly the Holocaust is the greatest crime of history and nothing could ever compare to it. But I mean, we just have to consider how held against the Holocaust previous crimes like the imperialism of the late 19th and early 20th century with all its genocides. The Germans' genocide in Namibia against the Herero and Nama people, the Belgian genocide in Congo, all of that pales and has become just a footnote in the minds of most people held against the Holocaust. So I don't find it so unlikely, even if for people nowadays it might be hard to imagine, that a future generation in some decades or in a century or so, that to them, in turn, the Holocaust would still be considered a great evil, but would become a footnote and would pale in comparison to the evil we committed by dooming not just millions but billions of people. And what will the people who nowadays lived, what will they say? They cannot claim, as their grandparents did about the Holocaust, they cannot claim, oh, I didn't know. I mean, you've been told by Greta Thunberg and by others. And again, here on YouTube, if you want, you can watch tons of experts, of climate scholars, explain it all. You can know. You can know exactly. If you don't know, then because you didn't want to know. And it might very well be that just like the generation of my grandparents claimed, oh, we just followed orders, we are not responsible, we only followed orders, my generation will one day claim, oh, we just bought stuff, we are not responsible, we were just buying stuff. And it won't be any better of an excuse than the former excuse was. It's funny that we live in such an age of relativism, yet despite people being such moral relativists, at least when you remind them of their own moral duty, like for example when you say you shouldn't fly, that at the same time, those very same people who like to say, oh, it's not all black and white, life is full of shades of gray, and all the other cliches they might spew, those very same people are quite unrelativistic when judging those that they have judged to be evil, that they have judged to be monsters. But with Kant, I would say be careful. Even in the cases that seem the most easy to judge and the most obvious, where it seems most clear, okay, this person is clearly evil and is clearly more evil than the average person, you don't really know that. Like, take someone who's a pedophile and because of that rapes children or watches child porn or whatever. I don't want to relativize the action as such. Of course, it's an evil action. But is that person really more evil than the average Joe? I don't know. He didn't pick having this sexuality. He didn't pick having those inclinations. Of course, he picked following them, and for that he's responsible. I don't want to excuse him at all. But how many of those who would judge him, who would maybe say, "Oh, we need the death penalty for child rapists," how many of those can control their own sexuality? How many of those who judge somebody for having watched child porn could not go without porn? Maybe they have tried for a week and then they watched porn again. To be sure, the porn they watch may be porn involving grown-ups. Maybe heterosexual or homosexual porn. But that's just because they happen to have a different sexuality that happens to be less harmful. But that's not a moral quality. The thing is, if they cannot abstain from porn now, when they maybe don't have to abstain, who's to say that if they had to? Who's to say that if some evil genie came along and suddenly changed their sexuality into only being attracted to children, who's to say that then they could abstain? Or if someone goes amok at his school, kills a bunch of children, it's easy to say that was a bad person, but are you better? Or did you just have a better life? If you had been like him, maybe if you had had less loving parents and a shitty home life, or maybe if you had been treated worse at school, if you had been bullied all the time, who knows if you would have acted the same way? Maybe you would have even been worse. Maybe you would have snapped much sooner. Maybe he went through bullying for years and, despite the hate and resentment building up in him, restrained himself for quite a long time before he finally snapped and went amok. Maybe you would have snapped sooner. Are you so sure you wouldn't? And here Kant makes an interesting remark about original sin. Of course, in Christian theology, there was long and still is for many this thought that Adam and Eve, they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge when they shouldn't have, and thereby they sinned. And this was the original sin that they passed on to their children, and therefore everyone is born with sin. Right? That's the reason that for a long time in Catholicism there was the belief that the babies who die without being baptized, they go to hell, or at least to the limbus, because sure, they on a personal level are innocent. They didn't commit any sin in this life. They didn't have time to sin, but they still, so to say, don't deserve heaven, but rather hell, because they are born with the taint of this original sin, right? And only because God sacrificed his son for us and Jesus died on the cross can we be saved from that original sin if we accept Jesus. That is, if it is, so to say, washed off by the baptism. And if you take this literally, it's of course completely stupid. One person's sin is that person's sin. It's his action that he committed out of his will, his lack of goodwill. It cannot be passed on to somebody else. You cannot inherit a sin or a crime. And that would be a pretty evil God who judges people, who judges even babies for the sins of their fathers. But here we may apply Kant's sympathetic method. I discussed that method in a much earlier lecture that you may check out. That method is about assuming that no opinion is just completely false and should just be thrown away, but rather trying to find the true core in it that is worth preserving, and trying to interpret any opinion, especially one that has been widely held and by many smart people, interpreting it in the best possible way, interpreting it so that it makes sense. And so how does Kant interpret the original sin? Well, he says, sure, the action as such, to eat the fruit, was Adam's. And the action as such is not committed by me, and the sin as such cannot be passed on to me. But I probably would have acted the same way in that same situation. If I had been Adam, if Eve had offered me the fruit of the tree of knowledge, I would probably also have eaten it. And in that sense, I might as well be treated by God as if I had. I might as well be identified with Adam. In that sense, Kant says, we keep again and again committing this sin and repeating this sin. We keep sinning in Adam, our father, every day. In that sense, it's the original sin. Indeed, you should consider the fact that Adam was not a specific person named Adam, who could also have been named Dave or whatever, but rather the word Adam basically means human, right? So Adam is humanity as such, and humanity as such is sinful, that is, it is capable of sin, and therefore, even if it has not committed, like a specific individual human has not committed a specific sin, as long as he is capable of it, he still rightly should be treated and judged as if he had committed it. And I can only say that I'm free of original sin if I can truly say of myself that I would not, in that situation, act like Adam. I would not eat the fruit, which is only what the Christ can do, right? Which is exactly the state I should get into when I start following the teachings of Jesus. So that is what Kant says about original sin, and I think it's quite interesting because it can apply to other instances of sins that are passed on. And that's something I think about, especially as a German, because I am, of course, from a nation that also has its original sin, that is the Holocaust. And as far back as I can remember, since I was old enough to, I don't know, read comments in the internet, again, I have heard people say, and I've read people write, oh, I don't see why I should feel guilty about the Holocaust. I was not born back then, not even my parents were born back then, it's not my fault. I refuse to feel responsible for it, and at some point it's enough. We need to stop with all this guilt stuff. And if you take it superficially, that is of course right. Like, yeah, almost nobody who's alive nowadays is in any way responsible for the Holocaust and should in that sense feel guilty about it. And yes, guilt, responsibility cannot be passed on. If my father is a murderer, that doesn't make me a murderer. And that doesn't mean that I should go to prison with him. It would be ridiculous to say that the crimes of the fathers are passed on till the seventh generation or whatever. No. However, and I've thought this from very early on, way before I read Kant. The question is, you who says this, oh, I refuse to feel guilty, I didn't take part in the Holocaust. The important question is not, did you take part? The important question is, would you have taken part? Because what's the difference between reality and possibility? Whatever is possible might as well be real. I mean, that's the meaning of the word possible, right? You only have a right to not feel guilty about the Holocaust if you can honestly say it's impossible for me to have taken part in it. Not I didn't take part in it, it's not a reality, but rather it's not even a possibility. Under no circumstances would I have joined in. Only then do you have a right to not feel guilty. But with most people, and I really do look at people like that. I look at my countrymen like that. Like I go through life and I pass by people on the street, or I buy from someone at the store, and I think you would have taken part in it. You are no better than your grandparents. You just have the first chancellor, Helmut Kohl, the first chancellor who didn't live as a grown-up through the Nazi time. He lived through it as a youth, but he was slightly too young to become a soldier. He once talked about the grace of the late birth. So saying about himself, he was graced with being born too late, right? The chancellor before him, Helmut Schmidt, had been a soldier for Hitler. The chancellor before that, called Georg Giesinger, had actually been member of the Nazi party. The fact that Kohl was a member of the Nazi party or didn't fight as a soldier for the Nazis was not necessarily because he was a better man than his two predecessors, but because he was a younger man than his two predecessors. And the grace of the late birth doesn't give you moral merit, doesn't make you a better person. So I consider most people as if they had taken part in the Holocaust, because they would have taken part in the Holocaust, of course. And I very early on noticed, going back to these comments, oh, why should I feel guilty for what my grandparents did? We need to stop this cult of guilt. Early on, I noticed that, curiously enough, it's mostly right-wingers who say that. So, in other words, it's exactly those people who should feel guilty because they are guilty, because they have taken part in the Holocaust, not in a physical sense, not in a factual sense, but in a moral sense. That is, they would have taken part in it. They have, so to say, with their soul, with their will, they have, so to say, mentally taken part in it. Because I can say about myself, I never, not even for a split second, had this feeling, oh, I'm annoyed by being told I need to feel guilty constantly, I want this to stop. Because whenever you got told to feel guilty, I just didn't feel like they were addressing me. I didn't feel it was about me, because I never felt like I would have taken part in it. I mean, it's very clear that had I lived back then, I would either have gotten out in time and gone into exile, or I would have shared the fate of, let's say, Theodor Lessing, that is being killed early on by the Nazis. And since I can say that of myself, I don't feel like I have this original sin. But if you can't say that of yourself, then of course you do have this original sin. It doesn't matter that you didn't do the action, you have the will that under those circumstances would have led to that action. And we see that very clearly nowadays in Germany, right? Because once again, Germany is taking part in a genocide, or at least supporting a genocide, to the point that the government, that the chancellor said that despite the international criminal court putting out arrest warrants, we won't arrest an Israeli prime minister. I mean, the Israeli prime minister comes from a right-wing extremist party, a party that actually originated from a terrorist group like Hamas. But surely someone from that party is completely incapable of committing any war crimes. So the Germans once again support a genocide And I mean, this is not a matter of opinion. We are way, way beyond the point where you can cancel someone for accusing Israel of genocide. Rather, you need to be cancelled if you have the slightest, even the slightest doubts about that. Like, I understand if at first, let's say in 2023, after the first shock of the 7th of October, people expressed solidarity with Israel and people were uneasy about Israel being accused of genocide. Okay, I understand. But sometime in 2024, you should have come around. You should have realized that terrible war crimes are happening. You could have realized even earlier. I mean, Ras Segal, a man who cannot really be accused of being an anti-Semite because he's an Israeli Jew. And he also happens to be a Holocaust scholar. He, not even 2 weeks in, so even back in October 23, said this is a textbook example of genocide. Meaning you could have known even back then. Meaning everyone who took time needs to ask himself the question, since it clearly was possible to see it right away, since Rassegal saw it right away, why didn't I see it right away? But okay, it can be excused if you needed some weeks or even some months. But if in 2024 you didn't at some point come around, if in 25 you are still a genocide denier, there's absolutely no excuse. We know now that you would have taken part in all the other genocides of history. It's without question. And you are really just like the climate change deniers. It's really the same thing. Both deny what can clearly be seen and experienced by everyone themselves. In the case of the genocide, we can all see Israeli soldiers uploading their own war crimes to TikTok and so on. And in the case of the ecological crisis, I mean, we can all see the weather changing, droughts happening, there being less insects. But also in both cases, you are not just refusing to look and to question your own experiences, you are also refusing to listen to the experts, basically being a conspiracy theorist. Because all the climate scholars agree that we are in a climate emergency. And likewise, it's no longer just Ras Segal, it's all serious genocide and Holocaust scholars, including Jewish Israeli ones like also Amos Goldberg, Omar Bartov. You can search up these names, including here on YouTube. You can easily find lectures and interviews by them where they explain why this is a textbook example of genocide. You simply have no excuse to be an apologist for genocide at this point. And my point here is that those people who complain, I refuse to feel guilty for what my grandparents did, it's not what I did. You are a superficial materialist if you believe that morality is about what you did or didn't do. Morality is about what you could have done. Morality is about your will, about what you are capable of. And just like Kant says, I'm pretty sure this is what he would say about Holocaust guilt if he lived nowadays. Just like he says, many people keep sinning day and again in Adam. Keep, so to say, recommitting and repeating his sin of eating the fruit. So many people, of course, not just Germans, keep recommitting the sin of the Holocaust. If not outwardly in their actual deeds, then inwardly in their will. That is, they are people who, living back then, would have taken part or at least would have been bystanders, not really looking, not really bothering to know when they could have known, not really doing anything to stop it. And as long as you are such a person, it is right to tell you that you should feel guilty for a crime that, yes, you didn't commit, but you might as well have committed. And the moment, ironically, The moment you will accept that, the moment you will say, yes, I am responsible, even though I didn't live back then, because not having lived back then does not make me a better person. That's precisely the moment when you will truly stop being responsible for it. That's the moment when you will have the right to say what you are saying now, that I refuse to feel guilty for something I have no part in. But the moment you get the right to say that, so Kant says most of the good actions or the lack of evil actions of people, we don't really know how much we can truly ascribe to their will and how much, maybe 99% of it, is just to be ascribed to circumstances. Kant says it's maybe just circumstance that lets one person rise to honors and be applauded as a good, holy person, while another person is hanged as a vile criminal. And Kant says in many cases it's just the coincidence of what temperament you have by nature, or how you were raised. In many cases it's not moral goodness, but just stupidity or weakness or cowardice or lack of opportunity that makes someone not commit evil. Of course, the currently reigning materialism will just say there is no such thing as will. There is only these material influences. So what genes and therefore what desire, what temperament does somebody have, or what socialization did somebody go through, how was he raised, in what milieu. These material conditions are all there is and all that determines our actions. And I will not refute that materialism here as such. I've discussed it in other lectures. I've talked about Kant's transcendental idealism. All I will say is, okay, you can hold this position, but then to be consistent, you must refrain from moral judgment altogether. Because if we are just predetermined in our actions by material conditions, then our actions are not our fault. We are not responsible for them. Then somebody could be a murderer or a rapist. That would be bad, that would be harmful, but it would no more be evil than an earthquake or a tornado killing lots of people. That's also bad, but it's not evil. We don't accuse the earthquake. We don't say you should not have done that, because we understand that the earthquake is not responsible. So really, you must be an idealist. You must believe that there's not just these material conditions, but there is a will. To Kant, the point is that the material conditions, they don't necessarily influence the will as such. They only influence in what ways the will manifests. And then the same will, depending on circumstance, might manifest in a harmful, maybe in a very harmful, or in a more harmless way. But the will as such is not necessarily different because of that. And that's why you can even have two people who maybe out of them one acts in a worse, in a more evil manner, and still he could be the better person. Because maybe he's restraining himself to not act even more evil, and maybe he just has very evil drives. Like, let's say there's someone who has a very choleric temperament and who constantly gets angry, who gets angry very easily, who constantly shouts at people, who constantly attacks people. You would probably say, what an asshole. But maybe the only reason you don't shout at people is just because you have a very phlegmatic temperament. And maybe his temperament would all
would actually drive him to more. Maybe having this temperament, he's inclined to physically attack people, to beat people up. And maybe it costs him a lot of restraint to only attack them verbally and not also beat them up. And maybe if you weren't so lucky having such a phlegmatic temperament, but had the same cholerical temperament he has, maybe you couldn't restrain yourself so much. Maybe you would be beating up people instead of just attacking them verbally. Likewise, once again, the pedophile. Maybe he watches child porn, which of course is an evil action, but maybe it costs him a lot of restraint to not rape actual children and only watch child porn. While you, on the other hand, maybe are someone who has way less sexual restraint. Maybe you could never be satisfied with just porn, and you need to have actual sex. And if being that way, you also happen to be a pedophile who is only attracted to children, you would have to have actual sex with children and would rape them. While he manages to at least restrain himself to some degree. That's also why, again, we should be careful judging people from the past for having said something racist. Maybe they did, yeah. But maybe they, while being more racist than us nowadays, they are still less racist than their time was, than the average person at that time was. Maybe they did think for themselves and question the things they learned and have less racist views. Like maybe in the time of slavery, they were for the abolition of slavery, even if not for complete equality. And that means they were 1 or 2 steps ahead of their time at least. While maybe you, on the other hand, are not ahead of your time at all. Not even 1 step. Maybe your time in general is ahead of that past person's time, but that's not your own accomplishment. But maybe you are not ahead of your time. Now, it's important to stress for me that this is not meant to be some new form of relativism. I'm not saying here, and Kant is not saying, that therefore all is equal. Like everyone is morally equal and we cannot ever judge. And of course, I don't want to say that people should be pat on the back for not, when they have done something wrong, for not having done something even worse. Like you would rightly be disgusted, to go back to the example I just used, if I said the pedophile who watches child porn should be applauded and congratulated because he only watches child porn and hasn't himself raped a child. Of course not. But that is because at the end of the day, we still have free will. I discussed that in the lecture, Do We Have Free Will? That Kant says, if we look at the phenomenal world, so the world as it appears to our senses, everything appears as caused by a previous cause, including our own actions. So we can explain every action of us, meaning we can also explain every crime of ours by something that came before. By a drive we had, by the way we were raised, by our beliefs, by what we were taught, and so on and so on. But these explanations can never really serve as true excuses, because we can always still say, and if we are not completely rotten, then our conscience will actually say to us, okay, yeah, fair enough, I had all these previous reasons that may have led to me doing that, but I still shouldn't have done it. And a should
implies a could, Kant says. So once we say I shouldn't have done it or you shouldn't have done that, no matter how much might have led to that, no matter how strong your urges may have been, then by saying so, we admit that that person or that we ourselves could have acted differently, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense to say you should have acted differently. So Kant would always say nothing is an excuse. You still have a moral duty. You still ought to act morally. And he says, for example, if someone constantly goes to the brothel and says, "Oh, my lust is too strong. I can't restrain myself," erect a gallows in front of the door and tell him everyone who goes inside will be hanged. And now see if he really can't restrain his lust. But if he can do it now, then he could have done it earlier too, he just didn't want to. So all of that is not meant to lead to some sort of relativism. But what Kant does say is that we can, when it comes to morality, we can judge, but we cannot judge. Now, this statement of Kant doesn't work at all in English because unfortunately the English language is quite poor here. So let me explain. In German, there are two different words for the verb to judge. There is urteilen and there is richten. And richten is meant in a judging in a court setting, right? So the judge, so the one who does the judging, is actually called Richter in German. So what does the judge do? He judges. What does the Richter do? Er richtet. So richten means to judge. Basically, you are a criminal, you need to be punished, right? And incidentally, to execute someone, so to kill him based on a or as a punishment based on a judgment, means hinrichten. So literally to basically execute the judgment. Now, urteilen means judging in a more general sense, in a less legal sense. Like urteilen is not necessarily about whether you are a criminal, whether you are evil. Urteilen can be about anything. Like when I say judging by the gray clouds in the sky, I think that it will rain soon. Here in Germany, I wouldn't say richten for judging, but rather I would say den Wolken nach zu urteilen. So judging by the clouds, urteilen. Usually when Kant says judging, he says the German word urteilen. So not what the judge does, right? So the power of judgment, one of the three faculties of cognition that we have, and of course one of his three main works, the Critique of the Power of Judgment, is just about that, is called Urteilskraft in German. Not Richtkraft, it's die Urteilskraft. So what Kant says is that we can urteilen, but we cannot richten when it comes to morality. And what he means by that is basically, to go with the English where I only have the one word judge, that we can judge the actions, but we cannot judge the will. Or in other words, going with what I said earlier in this lecture, we can judge the legality, but not the morality. So when somebody does do something evil, when somebody lies or steals or rapes or murders, I can totally judge that action. There's no relativism here. I can apply the categorical imperative and I can say, according to reason, your action was illegal. That is,
it was not in accordance with the moral law. And that means you should not have done that. And in other cases, I can judge this action of yours was legal. It was in accordance with the law. That is, you acted just the way you should have acted. But what I cannot really judge is a person's will. That is, I cannot judge why did you do this illegal or legal actions. Did you do it out of morality or immorality, or what was your reason? And this, as I said earlier, is not really a weakness of Kant's moral philosophy, it's a strength. Because Kant says, richten. So, judging in the sense of saying, you are evil. You did a wrong action because you have an evil will and you deserve punishment for it. That we can leave to God. He can do that. He is the final judge. He can look into the hearts. But we ought not to do that. In fact, Kant says we should not judge other people so much. We should judge their actions. Again, we should urteilen whether they are acting in a moral manner or not. But we should try not to judge, that is, richten, their character or their will too much. That is not our place. Kant says that it's also not a good thing to do because when we judge people too harshly, when we just throw them away because they've done something bad, when we just treat them as if they were evil, that will usually not turn them into better people. Rather, it will often lead to them hardening their heart and becoming even worse, out of sort of stubbornness, sticking to what they are doing. It's better if we treat them with some grace and some sort of tolerance. Again, not tolerance towards their evil actions, but tolerance towards, let's say, their person, their will. That is more likely to make them turn around. Here I point you back to my very earlier lecture on Kant's sympathetic method, because this has a lot to do with it. I already said in that lecture that Kant says no gardener can bring life into a dead plant again, and no physician can revive a dead person. Rather, you need to have, well, however weak, but you need to have some vitality left that you can then strengthen again. And so likewise, if somebody was truly evil and you just throw them away and cancel them as being truly evil, how is that going to make them better? If you want a person to become morally better, you need to assume that there's some good in them that you can speak to. So therefore you can say your action was evil, but not you are utterly evil, you are the devil, you deserve to die, but rather, look, your action was evil. I'm assuming that there's some good in you, that you don't want to be completely evil, that you have some conscience. So please, I'm speaking to that good part, please realize how evil your action was. And precisely because you don't want to be evil, because you want to be good, start acting in a different manner. This is more likely to help, Kant says. Which is also why Kant says, rather than constantly judging people and constantly throwing people away for their misdeeds, if we can, and actually he says this is more true for bigger misdeeds rather than for smaller mistakes, if we can, we should always try to excuse people in front of others. So if somebody else attacks someone, like let's say friend of mine talks about his colleague and what an asshole he is and says, oh, he was so unfriendly today and so on. I should try to find excuses. I should say, look, okay, maybe he acted like an asshole, but look, he had a hard day. I know his wife left him yesterday. Cut him some slack. Kant says, however, we should excuse people only in front of others so they don't get judged, that is, richtet, by others. We should not excuse them in front of their own conscience. So if that same colleague beats himself up and says, oh, I was so unfriendly, I acted like a real dick today to everyone, then we should not say to him, oh, it's not your fault, your wife just left you, so it's understandable. But rather, then we should say, yeah, you're right. You acted wrong, even though you had your reasons, even though you had a hard time, that's still no excuse. You still acted in a way you shouldn't have acted, so be better from now on. So don't excuse people in front of their own conscience, Kant says, but do excuse them in front of others. And he also says that those who believe too much in everyone being bad and evil and who are so ready to throw somebody away at the slightest wrong action, as if that person was now confirmed evil and completely lost to all goodness, those people are mostly projecting their own vile nature onto others. Like, they probably feel that they themselves are bad people who can't become better. They probably feel that they themselves, if they had done this action that they are now canceling another for, it would have been done out of pure evilness if it had come from them. And so therefore they project and say, oh, the other must also be completely evil if he did this action. The point why this is such a strength of Kant's moral philosophy is because morality is not about judging in the sense of richten. Again, we can leave that to God. Yes, Kant says, according to his moral principles, since it is all about goodwill, we cannot truly decide whether somebody else is good or evil or to what degree. But why do we need to know? We are not the eternal judge at the last judgment. So why is it important to know whether my neighbor is a good person or just acting friendly because he was raised that way? Do I need to walk around and constantly judge all the people? What morality is really about, Kant says, is us. It's my own morality. I should be a good person first and foremost. Of course, that will include trying to spread goodness, trying to help others become better people. But it is about me being a good person. So all a good moral theory like Kant's needs to tell me, and that's what the categorical imperative does, is what is expected of me, how I should act. But a good moral theory doesn't need to make me be able to judge whether others are truly morally good or not. If anything, that would just be a distraction. I would just sit around and pass judgment and maybe become self-righteous because I notice how bad, how evil so many people are. No, Kant says, don't distract yourself with that. Don't think too much about the goodness or evilness of others. Rather, focus on yourself. And when it comes to ourselves, on the other hand, here Kant says we should not seek excuses. So this is interesting because you often hear criticism about people applying double standards and how hypocritical that is. And in a way, Kant is not against double standards. Kant, in a way, is actually for double standards, just the other way around. So he would say, sure, it's hypocritical if you judge somebody else, maybe judge him harshly, maybe cancel him, for what you are doing yourself. That you can't do. But the other way around,
that you actually should do. You should judge yourself more harshly than others. So let's go to the example with the colleague. So if the colleague one day is very unfriendly and is mean to everyone, and then somebody else criticizes him for that, then I can excuse him in front of that other person, can say, oh no, remember his wife left him and his dog just died, he had a really rough time, so cut him some slack. But if I am unfriendly one day, then I should not excuse myself. Oh, I just had such a hard time, my dog just left me with my wife or whatever. But rather, I should say, no matter how hard the time was I had, it's not okay to ditch it out on others. It's not their fault, they didn't hurt me, so I need to control myself and I need to be better. So, if anything, we should judge our own actions more harshly than others. But still our actions, because here's the last thing. What Kant says, from that it follows that we cannot really judge whether others have goodwill and therefore are moral people, but it also follows that we cannot truly judge our own morality. Because the will, to Kant, is supersensual, meaning it cannot be perceived. To Kant, sensuality always has two parts. I explained that in the lecture on sensuality. We have the outer sense, through which we perceive bodies in space, including our own body. And so therefore, through the outer sense, we also perceive actions, right, that have legality or illegality. We also have the inner sense that lets us perceive our own consciousness with its representations, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires. But that too is not my I as it is in itself, but rather that is my I as it appears to my own inner sense. I explained that further in the lecture on the apperception and the self-consciousness, that to Kant there are, so to say, two human beings. There's the homo phenomenon, so man as he appears in his own consciousness. So as we are affected by our own thoughts or feelings or whatever that appear to ourselves. And there's the homo noumenon, the intelligible man. So the human being, the supersensual human being, as he can be thought but not perceived. And of course, the will belongs to the latter. Morality is not the morality of the sensual human. The sensual human is just an appearance. It is the supersensual human who should be moral. And if he is moral, then that will appear in a certain way, in actions that at least try to do good. But it's not his appearance, it's the will that matters. And my will as such does not appear, not to myself either. What I have in my thoughts, what appears to me inwardly, is intentions, wishes, desires. But again, as I said earlier, good intentions are not the same as goodwill. So not just can I not be sure about others' people's morality, I cannot even be sure about my own. Let's say I do something good. Let's say I give money to a beggar. Do I really know why I did it? If I really seek in my consciousness, what about my unconscious? Maybe I'm hiding my true drives from myself. Maybe I think I'm a good person, but maybe I just acted out of compassion because the beggar looked so miserable. Or maybe I just am self-righteous and acted so I can tell myself and make my conscience go quiet, so I can tell myself that I'm a good person. I don't fully know this. If you ever really self-reflect and really, really honestly and out of love for truth, try to search your heart, so to say, you will find it hard to really judge how much of your goodness is really yours, is really your goodwill, and how much comes from other sources. Like, for example, some years ago, about 3 years or so ago, that was the height of the protest of the so-called last generation here in Germany, climate activists who would glue themselves to the street. And back then I told friends, ask yourself why you're not out there, gluing yourself to the street. This is really the most important issue of our time. So why are you not fighting for it? Are you so lazy? Are you so cowardly? Is there anything more important you gotta do? So the only excuse you really have is if you can honestly say that you have some other manner, some better manner of fighting for the climate. If you can say, okay, gluing myself to the street, probably getting arrested for that, is not the best way I can use my energy to fight the climate emergency. As for myself, I didn't glue myself to the street, and I do have something better to do. I'm doing it now here, right? So my Aufklärung work, spreading Aufklärung through my lectures, through my texts on my website, through my books I'm writing, and thereby hopefully helping people to become more aufklärt, to become better, more moral human beings, who then in turn won't ruin the climate so much, but maybe will rather themselves fight for the climate. That's the best thing I can do, really. If I were to glue myself on the street, okay, there would be one more person protesting, but I think that way I'm changing less than when I'm here and trying to spread Aufklärung. And so it's better that one more protester glued to the street gets lost, rather than I take part in that and I lose time, I lose energy, I go to jail for a time, and therefore the books I could write get lost, because those books not many other people could write. So that is true without question. Like, there can be no debate about that it is better for me to write my books, give my lectures, than to glue myself to the street, that the climate is helped more by that. But still, even with that, I very, very seriously searched myself and asked myself, but is that really your reason not to glue yourself there? No doubt that is correct as such. But am I doing it because it is correct? Or am I not gluing myself there because I'm too lazy or because I'm too much of a coward? Is it really because I can serve the climate better by not going to jail, but rather writing my books? Or is it just because I don't dare going to jail? And those are the kinds of questions you should ask yourself. But Kant would say you cannot fully answer it. And that too, once again, it's not a weakness of his moral philosophy. Because just like morality is not really about judging others, you do not need to know whether others are good or evil. Let God decide. Just like that, morality is also not about judging yourself. You don't need to know whether you yourself are good or evil. Again, let God decide. What morality is about is trying to be good and to do good. So all you need to know, and all the moral law tells you, and I discussed that in the 3 lectures on the categorical imperative, all you need to know is what you ought to do, what your moral duty is. And then you should try to do that duty because it's your duty and for no other reason. But whether you actually are doing it just out of being duty bound or whether you are doing it for some other reason, knowing that doesn't change that much. You should just keep trying and trying. You don't need to know if you are succeeding or not. In fact, Kant would say it is good that we don't know. On the one hand, this can humble us. Just like not knowing others' true morality can humble us, because we can see someone doing evil actions, but we cannot necessarily say, oh, therefore I'm better than him because I'm not doing that actions, because I don't know, maybe I would have been capable of doing the same actions in his situation, so I should not put myself above others. And also, I should in general not be self-righteous. Like, if I knew that, yes, I really am being moral, that could very easily hinder my morality. That could put me at ease. I could say, okay, so I'm already done. I'm already being moral. I'm already perfect. I'm a saint, so nothing else to do. But since I am not sure, since there's always this uncertainty, I always have to keep working on myself. I mean, especially if you are religious, if you factor in God. Kant would say, if we knew perfectly well, okay, I'm fine, God is on my side, I will go to heaven, then we could take it easy. But if there's always this uncertainty, am I really good? Have I really done my duty? Do I really deserve heaven? Or is there maybe a slight chance that I still deserve hell? Then we are pushed more to keep trying being better people than we already are. So this goes against what Luther would call Werkheiligkeit, so sanctifying your own deeds, believing that just because you outwardly do good actions, you are a good person and you will go to heaven. No, even if you do the best of actions, you can never be truly sure if they come from a good will. So you have to keep trying to cultivate a good will. But then to the other side, this is also a strength of Kant's moral philosophy, because it also keeps us from what Nietzsche would call slave morality is so fond of, that is constantly beating ourselves up. Constantly saying, oh, I'm so bad, I'm such a sinner. Like in older times, it would be maybe the Christian who constantly said, oh, despite my outwardly good actions, I'm still so full of sin, I'm still lustful and vengeful and full of desires, and I deserve hell. Or nowadays, where certain leftist ideologues practice what is basically a secular version of that, saying, oh, I still have internalized racism, I still have internalized sexism, I'm still guilty of microaggressions. This too, Kant's moral philosophy can save us from. Because, to be sure, our actions may not always be perfect. Once again, when we jump into the lake, try to swim over to save the drowning person, we may not reach the drowning person because we weren't fast enough. But we can be sort of at ease about our actions. Just like we cannot be at ease about our will, we can sort of be at ease
about our actions. We can say, okay, I didn't act perfectly in every single situation, but maybe I still had the good will. Maybe the fact that the will couldn't fully manifest itself, that I couldn't fully realize my will, is not my fault. Maybe I did my best and that's all I could do. And the rest is really in God's hand. So what this insight of Kant really leads to is putting us at ease about our actions, while also giving us the needed uncertainty about our will to keep pushing ourselves. And in the end, once again, morality is not about judging the morality, whether of others or of myself. That's God's job. Morality is just about having goodwill, cultivating goodwill in myself and others, and out of that goodwill, doing good deeds. And the rest, the judgment, either happens never, if there's no God, or it will happen soon enough after this life, Kant would say. But that, either way, is not our concern now here in this life.
My deep thanks be to my supporters: Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Oblomov, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Elif Özün, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner,
Ron Suhl,
as well as to all others who support me and my Aufklärung cause.